Hi, everyone. Welcome to the June Data and Performance Management meeting. This is Erin from 211 Orange County. Go ahead and enter your name or your agency name into the chat box so we know who is participating. And you should be seeing my slides on your screen right now. So we have a small but mighty agenda today. First, we are going to be following up on the DV task force field request. And then we're going to talk a bit about the data quality plan, and we're going to wrap up with the transitional housing project performance report. So I did invite a couple members of the DV task force here today to talk about this request. But to provide a little bit of background, a couple months ago, this request was initially brought to this group, and there were concerns about why this data was being collected and what the benefit would be, and whether or not it was too intrusive and a few other things. So the feedback was taken back to the DV task force. And they discussed and they came back with a new revised question. And so what's on your screen now, this is the new field that they would like to ask. It's, do you consider domestic violence, abuse, threats, or violence by an intimate partner to be the primary cause of your lack of housing, one of the causes of your lack of housing, or not related to your lack of housing? And this field would only be asked to those clients that said, yes, I am a domestic violence victim or survivor. And it would show up on the enrollment screen underneath the existing DV field. So it would show up underneath the "Are you currently fleeing" field. And so the DV task force also sent some goals of gathering this data. So I have them here on the screen, and then Wendy, do you kind of want to jump in on this part, or do you want me to handle it?
However you prefer would be great. I can add, or however you prefer.
Why don't you take the lead?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. I'm the chair of the Orange County Family Violence Council Homelessness, Domestic Violence, Sexual Assault Task Force. We have, well, I've served on the Orange County Family Violence Council since 2010 and helped form the task force in 2018, in February of 2018, and have been working with domestic violence, child welfare, and often the overlap with shelters, domestic violence, teen shelters, and domestic violence and unhoused since 1994. So the Homeless Domestic Violence Sexual Assault Task Force also has a data subcommittee, and we formed the data subcommittee because we felt like we didn't have enough local information and data on the overlap and intersection between domestic violence and homelessness. There's some national data, but like everywhere else, Orange County tends to want to look at Orange County. It's different in various ways. And so I think local information tends to be much more relevant and influential as well. So the primary, I can go through this list, you can read it. The primary, well, let me back up for a second. So one thing we did as the subcommittee, and then as the task force generally, and the task force is made up of various individuals from, I mean, many of you actually, from different shelter service organizations, domestic violence organizations, county organizations, agencies, a good cross-section of population. The people that care about individuals who are both unhoused and survivors of domestic violence. And we looked at the data that was out there, and the HMIS data was, we thought, incredibly helpful. It was the first time we could really pinpoint, look, domestic violence is, or homelessness is not just about, crime, criminals, all the stereotypes, right? Drug abuse. It's really also about domestic violence. And frankly, that's why I was initially called into Judge Carter's courtroom to testify about the overlap, because of an understanding that educating people about the intersection could be very helpful to both really to get people in the community to understand the overlap and to get services in the right place. We found out through the HMIS data, your data, that 37% I always get this backwards, but between 2019 and 2020, one of the years, 37% of women who were in the HMIS system identified as survivors of domestic violence. The other year, it was 41%. We think that it's actually probably much higher, but that's still a pretty stunning number given that the national figure is 25% of women. And we have a graphic that shows that. And when we've showed it at presentations, it really makes people open their eyes. They're really surprised that it's that high. And I want to speak out of turn, but Teal's on the call, but I saw on the Wise Place website that they had 57% of their residents who were also domestic violence survivors. That's even higher. And that's, I think, more of what I see from my clients, just anecdotally in terms of my unhoused clients, and then who are also survivors. Well, all of my unhoused clients are survivors of domestic violence because that's why I'm seeing them. But it's quite a significant portion. But what HMIS doesn't tell us is whether the link between domestic violence and homelessness is correlative or causative. It does ask if the person's fleeing. But if they're fleeing, that doesn't mean necessarily that they're homeless because of domestic violence. It could mean that they encountered a violent relationship while they were on the streets or in shelters, and so they're fleeing now and need help in an emergency order. Or it could mean, when what it doesn't take into consideration are the people who, a number of my clients who were rendered homeless because of domestic violence 5, 6, 7 years ago and are still unhoused but are no longer fleeing. So it really is a different segment and something different that we'd like to capture for our knowledge, both individually to serve the clients and statistically. In terms of individually, I think once the question's asked of those, as Erin said, only those who identify as survivors of domestic violence, but whether they're fleeing or not, the question would be asked, was homelessness. And, it's your form. Feel like we want the gist of the question asked. So, if you want to change wording, or we're not at all wedded to the words, it was just, what we all came up with. But the idea that we want is to tabulate the causative factor of domestic violence to homelessness in Orange County. For individuals, that could be beneficial because once that causative question is asked, the organization, and usually as I understand it, it's an organization that's doing the HMIS intake. And so the information is in there, then that organization or the next organization that the person is getting services from can, if it's relevant, dig further into that question and really find out what kinds of services that individual needs and wants. And we heard in particular from one of our members who's a survivor, just got off the streets into actual housing after 6.5 years, and is also, and identifies as being domestic violence as being the cause of her homelessness. She explains how she was routed to different, with all good intentions, routed to different programs and services, but not domestic violence services. And that's, even though it was, 5-6 years earlier, that's really what she needed to dig into. And a lot of our clients, even when they are, for instance, self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, it's really the domestic violence that it all goes back to. And if we find that out, as the survivor on our subcommittee said, the more we know, the more we can offer the most appropriate services to that client. So that was part of the reason for wanting to add that to the intake. And the other is statistical, and goes along more with some of the things I was saying earlier, to dig into that stereotype of what causes people to be unhoused and homeless, to see on a macro level in Orange County, are we providing the most appropriate services initially to domestic violence survivors, right? So are they getting housed, or are they just going through a shelter and ending up unhoused at the end of it, without that long-term eye towards how is this person going to get on with their life once they go through the initial safety, getting a protective order measure. So we think with that data aggregated, we can better, as a community, know where to put services and funding and efforts. So I think I went through in that explanation the gist behind the goals written down on the slide here. I'm looking to see if I missed anything. Yeah, really being trauma-informed and multi-pronged. Everyone tries to be trauma-informed and multi-pronged, and everyone is. But again, the more information we have, and it's such a significant population, national data is like 20 to 40% possibility, right? It's very broad, but if we had actual data of what the causation is, I think we'd know more about where to put our services, and identify those service paths for our unhoused survivors. I know I did speak with Brett Teal earlier this week and asked her what their number for causative is, the causative connection, and she identified in 2020, 30% of her residents were rendered homeless because of domestic violence, and that's enormous. And I think that's something that we really want to know on a broader, Orange County scale. And Bertil, correct me if I misunderstood that, please. And again, we're open, putting that question back up. We're open to, it doesn't have to be worded that way. We were just trying to word it in what we thought was the clearest way, but it would be like a 14C to HMIS. So whatever makes most sense in that context.
So, all right, for the group, this is the question that the DV task force is requesting to be added to HMIS. And like I said, it will show up if your client says they are a domestic violence victim or survivor. And this is for all projects in HMIS. So I would like to hear from the group. For those of you that are working with clients directly, are you okay with the addition of this question? Do you have concerns or revisions, or what your thoughts are? And feel free to either unmute or put it in the chat, whichever is better for you.
Hi, everybody. This is Bertil with Wise Place. We are not, a DV shelter per se, but as Wendy's kind of already shared, we do serve a very high percentage of survivors of domestic violence. And so I do very much appreciate the 2 current questions in HMIS, but I would very much support what the DV task force is suggesting. And I think it gives us one more, good intentional layer and useful data to end homelessness. So Wise Place would support it. Thank you.
So is this going to be a question after are you currently fleeing? Oh, sorry, that's my dog. Or would it be in replace? Would it be replacing are you currently fleeing? Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm so sorry.
No, it would show up underneath. So the currently fleeing would still be there. And then this question would be underneath that as an additional item.
Yeah, it's just an added question to get a little bit more specific information.
And these 3, just for context, these 3 questions are all HUD required fields. So if you say, yes, you're a survivor of DV, the HUD requirement is to answer both of these. And then this field they're requesting would be an additional question. And we could make it optional or required also if the group has thoughts on that.
Erin, can I add something? There is data from CES, and I'm honestly not sure where it came from, but it looks like it's much smaller numbers, and they're in terms of causes of homelessness, and it looks like domestic violence had 38. As opposed, basically that was the highest number except for conflict or disagreements in general. I'm really not sure where this data came from. Someone provided it to me, but it's really small numbers. Small numbers of people, but a large percentage of those people identify domestic violence as a cause.
I'd have to see it. I think the VI SPDAT does include some information on domestic violence, but that is obviously only collected for coordinated entry projects and wouldn't include a lot of the clients that are being served in other project types.
And the questions on the VI SPDAT are very vague. They're not specific. They go from possible domestic violence to somebody else hurt you or something. It just doesn't necessarily really identify it being as a domestic violence situation, most of the questions.
Any other thoughts about this field from any of the service providers?
Hi, Erin. It's Catherine with the FSC. I definitely appreciate the revised question. I think that this question is a lot better in terms of something that providers would feel comfortable asking clients. I think the wording is a lot better. So I definitely appreciate that work and that revision that the task force did. I think looking at it from a standpoint of trauma-informed care, I think that that's something that we should be mindful of when we're asking an additional question for the sole purpose of data collection. I think that that's something, and I think that it would be good in the sense of if it's primary cause of your lack of housing, then of course, clients could be connected to services from there and that would help guide it. But if it's not going to directly impact currently, from what it sounds like, the client's eligibility or prospective connection to any type of housing opportunity, I think at least we're speaking of it in terms of CES, then I think that it would be better for it to be an optional question than a mandatory field. I think that it makes total sense for HUD required data collection to be mandatory fields. But I think if we're adding something that is not required by HUD, then it is better to keep it as optional so that if a service provider is not comfortable asking that question, then it's not required for their enrollment. And Wendy, I saw you shaking your head. So if there was something that maybe I misunderstood, please feel free to clarify that.
Oh, no, I appreciate your comments, Catherine. And I do, I think it is partially for statistical data, and I think the statistical data is important, but I appreciate that we wouldn't want to be taking up somebody's time and energy and asking them tough questions at a point when they're doing an intake and just needing services only for statistical purposes. I completely agree. But the input that we've gotten from survivors, not just the one that's on our little data subcommittee who has had a lot of input in this, but other survivors as well, is that that information would be helpful to them on an individual level in terms of getting them into, helping them get into the right services, and specifically domestic violence services for domestic violence survivors, which, and many of them, and it's, again, anecdotal from the clients that I have in my program and the ones that are on our task force. But what they tell us is that the more information about them really could have led to better services on an individual level too.
Yeah, and if I can add also, some of our partners are DV shelters, and they also appreciate the question, as it will be very helpful for them to serve better the clients that are coming to them.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that clarification. I think we, from a system perspective, would still feel more comfortable with that being an optional question. And at least, I mean, we would definitely be able to take this kind of proposal back to the group and the access points and who are working directly with the families and see what they're thinking. But I think there was something interesting that you said, Wendy, of how the clients, and I think that that's really important, right? To ask the clients who are being served what they think would be most useful in getting them connected to the services they need. I think that it's great that those questions were asked to those clients to make sure that we as service providers are doing the right work. I think that potentially this could also be resolved with additional training and clarification to some of the service providers, instead of it just being in the form of an HMIS question that's asked. Because even if the question is asked, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in any action by a service provider. So those are my 2 cents. I don't need to necessarily continue. I do think that this question is worded great. And I do think that it would be best to keep it as an optional question, especially if it's going to be applied to all projects in HMIS, that it can be up to each of those individual providers on if that question should be asked for their specific project. But thank you so much, guys, for working on this. I think that the work that the DV task force is doing is really important and really beneficial to the individuals and families in our community. So thanks for that.
So Erin, I know we talked at the task force. What will be the process? Is it a vote among all the agencies are part of the data committee? And then does it go to the COC? How does that, what is the steps to be taken?
I think if the data committee is comfortable with adding this field, and if it's optional, I think it can go into HMIS. I don't think it needs further approval. I'm thinking if we wanted to make it required, then maybe it would require approval. So yeah, I think if the group is okay with adding it as an optional field, I think we can go ahead and do it.
Erin, can I ask a logistical question about that? If it's optional, does that mean, so I would think that if the provider thought it would be helpful to the individual, they would ask the question. And if for some reason they didn't think it would be helpful for the individual, they wouldn't ask. If they didn't ask, would that be listed statistically as didn't answer, or what would that look like in the aggregate?
It would probably be a blank field. So kind of the way it would look for a client is they would have a yes answer for the DV victim survivor, and then they'd have answers for these two other fields. And then this new field would just be blank. We could add an option like the client doesn't know, client refused, data not collected, that we have for other fields. But if it's optional, even if those options were there, it could be blank either way.
Okay, I think it would help to have something that it doesn't have to say why it wasn't asked or answered, but just something to say wasn't asked or answered, if possible.
Wendy, will that be a recommendation to make it not optional, or are you okay with making it optional?
I would think that most providers would ask it, even if it were optional, just because I can't imagine that it would not be helpful to the client. So I guess I don't see the point in making it optional, but I'm okay with that. I think that if it is optional, again, I would ask that there be some kind of category to show when the question wasn't asked. And if that was deemed more helpful to the individual not to ask the question at all, that we still have it in the aggregate data of, another survivor who was not asked the question.
We could also kind of start off with it as optional, and if the data isn't there, if it's not being populated, then we could revisit. Or we could just take it to the COC board. I think either way, they'll be informed of this if it's implemented. But if it's optional, it might be more informational. And if it's required, it might be require approval. So it kind of depends how you guys want to move forward. Do any of the service providers have any more thoughts on this? Any overwhelming yeses or nos?
I mean, it's hard enough to get our staff to answer questions that they should be asking and answering in HMIS. But I think as a mostly outreach provider, I think it would be pretty good data to collect. Since we are seeing so many people on the streets. I don't know if I have an opinion on it either way. It's going to go in there regardless. But I think, to be honest, if we don't have it be a mandatory ask, I think people are going to skip over it, whether or not it's beneficial to our agency or not.
I agree with you, Cassie.
And if it's going to go to the board anyway, that's just my, not to be pessimistic about it, but I mean, anytime that there's anything, and it's not any necessarily a fault of our case managers, but because of the nature of where we're seeing our clients, I think it's sometimes that people are in a big hurry, and if they can't pass it or save without answering it, I mean there might be some data not collected type of situations in that, but I think it's That's just my initial thought on it.
Thank you.
Are there any housing providers that have perspective on this? We have American Family Housing, Pathways of Hope, Families Forward. We already heard from Wise Place, and they're in support. Stand Up for Kids, Illumination Spin, 1736. Anybody? Housing providers, since it's a kind of a little bit of a different group of clients. Any thoughts on this field? All right, so let me follow up with HCA also, Wendy and Soledad, and see if they also have a recommendation on optional versus required and how they want to move forward with the COC board. And then either way, I'll let both of you know what the decision ends up being. And then we'll let the users know what the decision ends up being at the July user meeting. Any last comments, questions, or thoughts on this one?
There's a note in the chat, Aaron.
Yes, I'm aware that Jamboree and WTLC would support this question also. Okay.
Jamboree Housing, WTLC, and Human Options are on our, not only the task force, but the data subcommittee that helped draft the question.
Okay, great.
And I'm not in your position, so I don't feel like I can input into the optional mandatory question.
Okay, well, this at least gets the conversation started, and so we can follow up with you and on the final decision.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. We'll see
All
you
right,
later.
thanks, guys.
And I put my email in the chat in case anybody who's not already involved with the task force would like to be. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. So next up, we're going to talk about the data quality plan. So last meeting or 2 meetings ago, I don't know, time doesn't have any meaning to me. We talked about kind of the future projects for the HMIS team. And this was one of the items that the group was really interested in moving forward with. And so we do have a draft of the data quality plan. It's a pretty solid draft, like a final draft, but I'll send that out with the meeting minutes for this meeting for those that would like to review. And then next meeting, we can take a little time and follow up on any feedback that any of you have on the draft. And also, if you prefer to submit feedback over email, you can submit tickets on that also to get this finalized. But these are the components of the data quality plan, and I'm gonna kind of walk through them. So the data quality plan goes over what the different components of data quality are, as well as where we're looking at them on our different reports. It also has a section on monitoring and reporting and kind of goes over our data quality process. There's also an incentives and enforcement section that I wanted to talk with the group about today. And then we have some reports and tools related to the data quality plan that kind of give you a place to look on your data quality. And kind of the purpose of this is to have one place where you can go and see all the different ways that you should be looking at your data quality and kind of help you get your data as good as it can be in terms of data quality. So these are the components of data quality. There's data completeness, which is looking at is the field entered or is the field blank? And then also as part of that is data coverage and bed utilization. So coverage is looking at of the projects that we have in our COC, what percentage of those are in HMIS? Because the more projects we have in HMIS, the more complete the data that we're pulling will be. And the utilization is the other component of completeness, and that is looking at, of the beds that you have, how many are filled. Again, because the more full and that capacity your project is, the more data you have and the more complete it is. So that's the first component. The second component is data timeliness, which is how quickly you are entering data into HMIS once you have received it from the client. Data accuracy is looking at, is the information that you're entering into HMIS accurate? Is it actually reflecting the client's situation? And consistency is, are all of the agencies participating in HMIS collecting the data the same way? Do we all have the same definition of the data elements? So these are all sections in the data quality plan, and it goes in detail over each of these, as well as where you can find this data and look at it. The monitoring and reporting section goes over our report card process. Because our data quality report cards do handle a chunk of the data quality issues. It doesn't handle all of them, but it is a good part. And we want to have a standard process and schedule for the report cards. So everyone's on the same page, people know what to expect, it's not a surprise. And so this is kind of the process of when we'll send data quality corrections, when you need to have them completed by, and when the report cards will be published. And we're hoping to implement this soon. We're working on the report cards now, and we're obviously past that April 30th deadline for the Q1 data, but this is what we're trying to get to. So the incentives and enforcement section of the data quality plan is the area that's blank right now, the only area that's blank. And so what we want to determine is how should there be incentives or enforcements for good or bad data quality? You know, what if an agency consistently has low data quality and is impacting our reports that we submit to HUD in a negative way? What if someone's doing really great? Should that be rewarded? So I put up a couple potential incentives or corrective actions. Possible incentives could be future funding opportunities, or maybe an award from the COC to cover your user license fees if you have some that you need to pay. Maybe an agency spotlight on our website or at the user meeting. And then potential corrective actions could be a review and improvement plan by some group of people. That could either be this meeting or it could be maybe a separate data quality committee. If we were to do an improvement plan and it didn't improve, maybe the agency would be removed from HMIS if they weren't required to participate. And the last one could be potential loss of funding or exclusion from future funding opportunities. And I don't necessarily mean that, you know, if you have bad data quality right now, your funding is going to get taken away. But over time, and specifically if you have COC funding, part of the ranking is performance and part of that is data quality. So if your data quality is bad, your score will be lower and you could potentially lose funding in that way. If you're private funded, maybe that wouldn't happen unless they're looking at these reports, but that's why it's a potential loss of funding. So I wanted to hear from the group. If you like any of these incentives or corrective actions, or if you hate them, that's fine too. Or if there's other things that you can think of that would fall into either of these categories. Maybe asked this way, would any of these incentives actually incentivize you as a service provider? Oops.
Aaron, it's Bertia with Weiss Place. Sure. I think these are things that, we all should be doing anyway, but I know for us, as a staff of 8, including myself, this has been a journey at Weiss Place and something that we've tried to really focus on, but sometimes have, missed it and failed and then corrected. So, data collection has been a journey at Weiss Place, especially for the 3 years that I've kind of come and really try to focus our organization on it. So I think the incentives are really great. And then also the potential corrective actions would, get us to, really kind of get it together and keep it together and be more consistent.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Joey Garrido with Families Forward. Yeah, I agree with that. Definitely at Families Forward too, especially with the new implementation of the user license fees. I mean, that's a big incentive, to have that maybe be covered partially or whatever. So.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody really hate any of these? And just to be clear, this isn't like if you have one bad quarter, you're getting kicked out or anything like this. There would be, steps in the process. We go try to review and correct your data over the course of like 6 months or a year or whatever the case may be. So I don't want to scare anybody or anything like that, but just kind of look at it in that light. Is there any of these that you really think are not good incentives or corrective actions?
I mean, I think we've been talking about this for so long. We used to joke like, just kick them out. But
Would love to, no.
but like also I'm dealing with a different agency and a different type of agency, than I was before, where we have implemented like the real way that we should be putting in street outreach clients. And I know that it's like probably not looking that great. Because there's a lot of missing information because people are refusing. So that's why I've been kind of quiet, because I think this all is great. I think this is all stuff that we've tried to like cover, before. But I don't know personally what that is going to look like, since we kind of just started doing that, how that is going to really like affect our agency specifically, now that we're not just like picking and choosing who we're putting into the system. So it's a little, I mean, I wouldn't mind, if we were doing poorly, I wouldn't mind to, have a review with the data committee or whoever. I think that would be really helpful to kind of get, my peers behind me and give me some, additional, whatever, suggestions or whatever. But yeah, I think the more harsher, the funding things are a little scary to me because I really don't know like what it looks like on the bigger picture, yet. So
Yeah. And we, like 211, this data committee, don't have control over any funding either way, just to be clear. I'm just saying that if a funder were to look at your data quality, they could decide either they want to fund you or not want to fund you based on that information. So this group, 211OC, would not be making any of those decisions, but I put them on there kind of as something that could happen, just because the data quality is published on a quarterly basis.
right, and that's always the threat to staff. Like, this is what's paying your payroll, and if we lose this money, it's because of you and your bad data quality.
Tough love over at CityNet.
Always.
All right, so we got a couple comments. Janine said, I think as long as there is a review and time to make change, I think that those are fair incentives and actions. And Armando said, I think the incentive to receive awards to cover user license fees would be helpful. Okay, great, thank you. I had a question and I lost it. I was overwhelmed by Cassie's tough love. Let me see if I can think it. Anybody else have any thoughts on this? Oh, so would anybody be interested in being in like the review committee? This again is kind of informal. It would be kind of like what Cassie was saying, a group of your peers that are looking at your data and can kind of help guide you, maybe set some goals for what the agency should be working towards. Or should that be part of the data meeting? I'm just worried it might take most of the meeting if we did it that way. Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it should be a separate committee specifically for those types of reviews. I mean, to be honest, like we kind of know like who's going to join. I feel like there's some people that are really, involved in these meetings and some that aren't. So that kind of like come here and there. So I think a separate meeting would be good. But you're right. I think it would take up a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we can work on that also. We'll probably send out an email looking for volunteers. It may not be immediately, but keep an eye out for that also. Any other thoughts on incentives or enforcements? Any ideas anyone has that aren't covered here? All right. If you think of anything, let me know when we can come back. So the next section of the data quality plan is kind of all of the support documents, I guess you can say. So let me show you this The appendices of the data quality plan lists out all of the different reports and where you can find them. So let me just show you that really quick. And when you see this data quality plan, it looks intimidating, but I would say you'll probably read it through like full the first time once, and then you'll go back and reference specific sections. So try not to get overwhelmed. It'll be okay, everybody. But so the appendices has the different types of data quality that we talked about earlier, and all of the different reports that you can run to look at this data. And then we also have this summary, which is very similar information, but in a chart. So this will all be available when the data quality plan is published. So you can see on the left over here, we have the different components of data quality, as well as the report names, where you can find it, how you should use it, and then it also references the actual data quality plan, so you can see a little bit more detail on the different reports. So like I said, this is kind of your data quality mecca. If you have questions on data quality in a report you can run, we want you to have this document so you can go and see what you should be doing. We also have another document which is actually already available on our website. Hopefully some of you have seen this. This is a data quality corrections reference guide. So this chart right now includes all of the universal data elements. So these are all the data elements that you have to collect on all of your clients. And these are all included on the data quality report cards that we publish. And when we send you corrections on a quarterly basis, there are different colors for those corrections. And this chart is telling you what those colors mean for each specific data element. So you can kind of use this as a reference as you're going through your data quality corrections as part of your report cards. And so I'll send all of these documents with the minutes so that you can review. Please keep in mind, most of these are draft except for this one. This is already published on our website. But like I said, any feedback that you have on this is really helpful. We want to make this useful for you. So any thoughts on that are appreciated. Any comments, questions, anything I didn't cover that you think would be important to include in the data quality plan, anything like that? I forgot to mention the data quality plan also does include our current thresholds. So you can see the utilization thresholds here, as well as the data quality thresholds for each project type. And these are what we use for the report cards. So we're really trying to get everything in one place. Any thoughts? All right. So our last agenda item is the transitional housing project performance reports. As usual, if you would like to see project level performance, please check out the project scores report. And if you did look at it before, we did update this page today. There were some projects that were being counted as 0% income for goals 6 and 7. So we fixed that. So if you looked at it before, you might want to check again just to see for those two measures. And then this is the goals and outcomes report. So our reporting period for the transitional housing project performance reports was April 1st through March 31st. And these are the measures that we're looking at for transitional housing. The first is entries from homelessness. So the percentage of clients that entered from a literally homeless situation. You can see that we've actually had a decrease in this measure. And in a minute, we'll go through where clients are entering from that is not a homeless situation. So you can see kind of where that drop is happening. The next measure is looking at how long clients are staying in transitional housing projects. And our average days has increased a little bit from the last time we ran the report. This is probably due to COVID and agencies trying to keep clients in a safe housing situation rather than having to exit them back to the street while COVID has been going on. The next goal is looking at utilization and whether transitional housing units are being fully utilized. This is also related to the data quality that we talked about earlier. You can see that utilization has decreased from the last time we ran this report, and this is likely also due to COVID. Some projects have shared housing situations, and some clients were not comfortable staying in a shared housing situation, and that may have caused the decrease in utilization for some projects. For goals 6 and 7, we are looking at income, an increase in income. For goal 6, it is for stayers that were in the project for at least a year and have increased their income. And goal 7 is looking at leavers, so they exited during the reporting period. And we have stayed pretty consistent for both over the last couple of reporting periods, which is great. I did want to ask the group about raising these thresholds just a little bit because I don't think we've ever increased the transitional housing thresholds for income. And since we are consistently meeting these thresholds, I don't think it would hurt to increase at least a little bit to show that we're still trying to improve our performance. So I would recommend for goal 6 increasing to 15%, and goal 7 maybe 40% or even 38%. Does anyone have thoughts about that? Any transitional housing providers that want to weigh in? Wise Place and Families Forward might be the only two on. I don't remember if Pathways still has transitional.
Erin, if we could digest this one a bit more and get back to you, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, the same here. You know, I'm not involved so much as the actual program, so I'd probably want to confirm.
Okay. So we can leave them for this time, and then when we run these reports again, we can increase the threshold then. Once everyone's kind of had some time to think about it. The next goal is looking at exits to permanent housing destinations. So again, we've stayed pretty consistent. We've dipped a little bit, but overall we're fairly consistent there. And then goal 10 is looking at clients that exited from transitional housing to a permanent housing situation and then later showed up in the HMIS system again. And again, we're staying pretty consistent there. So for goal 1, going kind of into the details again, this is looking at entries from homelessness. This donut is showing of the clients that did not enter from a homeless situation, where are they coming from? And over half are coming from institutional settings to transitional housing projects. And then a little over a quarter are coming from family or friends. Wise Place for Families Forward, I don't know if you have any experience with this. Why so many are coming from institutional settings? Is this COVID related or something else?
Yeah, honestly, Aaron, I don't know that.
Okay. I was just curious. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay.
All right, so, and then along the top here, you can also see the breakdown by the different household or subpopulations, how each of them are doing on this measure. For households with only children, this is going to come up a couple times. I don't think these are really households with only children. I think this is a data quality issue that the children weren't appropriately associated with their head of household. And so these clients should probably be under this households with children. And I think that's why the entries from homelessness is so low, because a lot of family projects have reunification or things like that. So that may be why this entries from homelessness is so low. Goal 2 is looking at length of stay in transitional housing projects. So our threshold is 180 days. And we've been a little bit above that for maybe the whole time since we've had the threshold. But you can see again by the subpopulations how we're doing. And again, for households with only children, I think it's the same issue. I think these really should be included in the households with children number. And a little chart here, you can see by client how many are falling within our threshold, which is the 180 days. And then how many were 6 months to a year and how many were more than a year. The good news is most of the clients in transitional housing are meeting that threshold. But there is some that are within a year or even more than a year. So this next one is looking at utilization. Again, the utilization went down from the last time we ran this, probably because of COVID. You can especially see this in households without children. This is likely because these clients are in shared housing, whereas families frequently have their own units, so they'd be able to kind of isolate their and in our little chart, you can see the breakdown of projects that fall within the normal utilization range, which is 65% to 105%. And we do have a little over half of the projects that are in that normal range. And then 13 are under 65%, meaning they're underutilized, and only 2 were overutilized. Goal 6 is looking at the increased income for stayers in the project. So again, we don't get a lot of data for this measure because in order to be included, the client has to be active in the project for at least a year. So that's why the numbers are so low. And you can see we only have data for households with children and without children. The good news is in our little donut, you can see the breakdown for the clients. So almost 75% of the clients either maintained or increased their income, which is great. And then only about a quarter had a decrease in income, and then 8% had unknown income. The next chart is looking at leavers with increased income. So there are a lot more clients in this measure because it's looking at anybody that exited. And the ratio of those that increase their income or maintain their income is almost 90%, which is really great. Looks like we're doing a good job of collecting that income data. And we only had 11% that decreased their income and a very small group that had unknown or no income. Our next measure is looking at exits to permanent housing situations. And you can see 60% of our clients are exiting to permanent housing. We're doing slightly better in households with children than other household types. And then you can see in our chart, for those that are not exiting to permanent housing situations, where are they exiting? And most are exiting to either a homeless situation or a temporary situation. And then about a quarter are missing data. So this usually happens when the household disappears or otherwise doesn't want to share where they're going with the provider. And then some clients are exiting to institutional situations. And our last measure is looking at returns to homelessness after being housed. So the clients exited transitional housing to permanent housing and then returned. And again, we have our breakdown by household type. We're really high on veterans. That's only because the number of veterans that exited and then returned or exited was so low. So this is just kind of an outlier. But in our little donut, you can see the types of projects that the clients are returning to after they've been permanently housed. And it's fairly evenly distributed by the different project types. And I think the reason for this is because transitional housing is kind of like a mid-level intervention for clients. It's usually not for clients that are chronically homeless. And so the rapid rehousing and transitional housing, emergency shelter, street outreach, these are all more of could be more of a mid-level intervention. There's very few permanent supportive housing returns because these are generally not chronically homeless clients in transitional housing. And our last chart is looking at, so when the clients first exited from the transitional housing project, where did they exit to? And most of them either went to owned or rent, probably just rent, where they were not receiving any ongoing subsidy, followed by family or friends permanently, or rental or owned with a subsidy, and finally there was one PSH client. And this makes sense because transitional housing, once you exit, and that's pretty much it. So it makes sense that most are going to somewhere where they're not receiving an ongoing subsidy. So that was all I had on the project performance reports. Does anybody have any questions or comments about the reports or anything we've talked about today? I'll give it one more minute, but if nobody has any comments or questions, then we will wrap up early. We will send out meeting minutes from this meeting, like I mentioned, as well as the recording and the materials. I will send the data quality plan materials. If you guys could please give it a look and either submit a ticket with your feedback or come to the next data meeting to talk about it, that would be great. Ideally, we'll be implementing it in July or August, along with the data accuracy dashboard that we've talked about in a couple previous meetings. And the next meeting will be on July 8th, same time. And we will share the agenda for that meeting at the user meeting, as well as when we send the project performance reports for that month. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. So I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you guys so much for attending and providing your feedback. If you haven't already, please enter your agency name in the chat so we know who was participating. And we will talk to you guys next month.
Thanks, Erin.
Bye, friend.
Have a good afternoon. Thanks for everything you do. Your little I don't know what they're called, reports are always fabulous, but I have a real issue with hearing the word donut over and over.
Circular chart. I will try that.
No, I'm just kidding with you, but every time I hear it, I'm like, oh, a donut. Anyway, thank you and hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.